Greetings. This is Worship Leadership Fall 2016, Week 2 meeting on the last day of August, August 31st. I've got Josh with me. Looks like he's kind of mobile on us here. Looks like he's moving around. So I'm going to see if Josh has any questions, and then I'll try to address some things that a few folks have raised through email. Our goals, especially in these first few meetings, is to get you up to speed. Make sure you feel comfortable, particularly with the major projects, because the majority of your grade will be determined just by getting those major projects in on time. The book review, the 2 observations, the 3 designs, later in the semester, the group project. That's really the majority of your grade. If you turn all of that in on time, then you should do well this semester. And then, of course, the other goal, which is really our more important goal, is to equip you to be a better worship leader. So we certainly want to help you with that. And I'm hoping that we won't be able to have this meeting every week, but the weeks we are able to have this meeting, I'm hoping we can have some rich dialogue, and I'm hoping you're having some rich dialogue in your groups. Now, let me say this about your group interactions. Let me remind you, first of all, the philosophy behind that. Our concern, anytime there's an online class, let's say it's bigger than 10, is that people are just posting things, but you're not actually interacting with other people in the class. And in talking to some students, even here at NOBTS, it seems that sometimes that is the case. So we're trying to create an environment. We are experimenting to some degree, but trying to create an environment that encourages you to interact with your fellow classmates. And we're creating cohorts. So there are actually 6 cohorts. We started with about 10 in each one, but a few more people have been added. I know at least groups 1 and 2 have now 11. And I'm hoping, I joked with a couple of guys last week about shepherding their cohorts, but I'm hoping that some of you will emerge as shepherds of these cohorts and try to make sure everybody's participating. Now, somebody asked a very important question related to the group discussion last week. Should there be one thread or multiple threads? There should only be one thread per question. So last week, there was a get to know you question and a question on incarnational worship. There should have only been 2 threads. I'm realizing that there may have been some groups that had multiple threads, but that kind of defeats the purpose of what we're trying to do. We're wanting to see everyone interact. So someone just joined our meeting. I'm not showing a name. It could have been a cell phone, 504-650-7025. I'm going to mute your phone for now, and then I'll give you a moment in just a moment, I'll let you talk, but we want to make sure we don't have an echo. All right, so back to what I'm saying about the group discussion. We want you to have your dialogue and interactions within a single thread. So what will happen is the first person to post in a given week, so it's week 2, and Dr. Miller has also decided to use the group discussion format. The first person, so Josh, let's say you go to your site. I think you've already done some things with Blackboard discussion. Let's say you go to your site and nobody else has posted on Unit 2. You want to, I believe Dr. Miller told you what he wanted you to call it, but I would just put Unit 2, then the title he suggested. Next week, I can tell you right now, it's going to be Worship History. So next week will be Unit 3, Worship History. If I'm the first person to do that, hello, sir. Your phone is not telling us who you are. Remind me of who you are. I think we met last week.
This is Jay Atkins from Life Point Church, Senatobia, Mississippi.
That's right, Jay. Good to see you, brother. So we're talking about group discussion right now. And I'm saying to everyone, because we are recording, that the group discussion each week should really be on a single thread. That didn't necessarily happen on Unit 1, and that's okay. I'm not asking you to go back and redo Unit 1, but on Unit 2 and the forthcoming weeks, if you're the first person to go in and post, you need to put Unit 2 and then the title. We'll try to put a title up there each week. At best, though, at least you could put Unit 3 or Unit 4. Next week, I can tell you it's going to be Unit 3, worship history. So if Josh is the first one to do that in his group, he's just going to make his initial post. That will be the thread that gets it started. So if I'm Jay and I'm in Josh's group, I'm going to then come into that group. I'm going to see that someone has already posted a thread for Unit 2, and that will keep our group discussion clean too, instead of there being like umpteen million threads. There should really only be like 20 at the most. Most weeks only have one discussion thread anyway. Guys, give me just a moment. I need to close this door. I'm getting a little sound from other rooms. All right, so that was one issue that was raised, and I wanted to go ahead and clarify that at the beginning of our meeting. For the first few weeks, I am leading odd weeks, okay? Last week, I told everybody just think Woodward is odd, which would be true in many ways. So for the first few weeks, I'm like 1, 3, 5. And I think when we get around 7, I end up doing 2 in a row. So I end up doing the even weeks. But for now, I've got the odd weeks. Dr. Miller has the even weeks. I believe his unit is already up. The discussion is in place. And I do think there was one other question someone asked me about seeing a rubric for the book review. Now, I'm not in charge of the book review, but I can go to assignments. Oh, excuse me. Let me share the screen. That's going to be better, so everybody can see what I'm looking at. All right, let's see if we have a rubric. I know that we do for the other assignments. All right, so all you do is you go to book review here. I'm sorry, you click on book review, and you just click view rubric, and there's your rubric. So Dr. Miller's actually grading that, but I will make him aware that there's a book review rubric or his grader. And then for these other things, I don't think there is one for worship assessment, because to be honest with you on that, guys, let me just tell you, that's coming up due pretty soon. On the worship assessment criteria, this is really to help you. I mean, if you turn in 2 to 3 pages on time, you're going to make a good grade. But do it well, because the better your worship assessment criteria is, the easier your aesthetic observation is going to be. So let's look at a aesthetic observation, which is one of the projects that will be due in October. So to get the highest grade for objectivity, you have to recognize personal bias and overcome it. In other words, we assume most of our students are evangelical. So if you go observe a Catholic church, like, we don't need a whole paper about what you believe is wrong about Catholic theology. We get that. We understand that. That's not your job for this. Your job for this are, what are the things that you observe that will make you a better worship leader? Is there any? So that's what we mean by getting back past your personal bias, not trying to convert you to whatever you observe. Just want you to observe and learn some things. Always identify assumptions. Number 2, accurately and thoroughly examines evidence and sources. Assessment of evidence is insightful and comprehensive. Number 3, always draws valid and reasonable conclusions from the premises. Evidence is cogent thinking. Next one is organization, exceptionally clear and directive focus, connects ideas with exceptional clarity. And then the last one is clean, clear, concise writing that evidences fewer than 4 grammatical communication errors. So actually, that's a very small percentage, like writing errors. The other things are more related to the organization of your paper, valid arguments, use of evidence, and objectivity. So those are our rubrics. Now let me go back to the class. I'm going to stop sharing. We now have 5 people who's joined us. So any of you guys have a question?
Doc, I have one.
Sure.
On the group discussion, what I've noticed, and maybe I'm not looking in the right place, like Monday, I went and clicked on create a thread and set that up. But on previous assignments, everything just says create a thread, and it almost like it creates a new thread. How can we keep that from happening? What do we need? What's the process we need to follow so that we don't create multiple threads?
All right, so if I go to a group, now it doesn't look exactly the same for me, but if I go in here to group 1, and I'm going to go down to group, which group are you in? That'd be the best way to do it.
Group 4.
All right, let me just go to group 4. So if I'm in group 4, everybody should be able to see this, and I click on group discussion. Should look something like that for you guys. So someone has already started this thread, getting to know you. When I click on that, my computer's a little slow here, sorry. All right, so these folks have all responded to this thread, getting to know you. So this is what I mean when I say respond to the thread. The original person who created the thread is here, Jay Kress. When I click on Jay Kress, he already said, my name is Jay Kress. So the responses are when I click on that and I go to this page. So this was done in the correct way. And if I'm whoever, Cliff Lewis, I could click on Stevie Franks, and then I could respond to what Stevie Franks says. So I'm not calling these threads. I'm saying all of this, everything you're seeing on my screen, all of that, those are the correct responses to this initial thread.
Now, when we go in here and click on group 4 and we create a thread, we just essentially do the same thing, correct?
I'm realizing maybe I'm using I'm realizing what you're saying now. I think maybe I should be using the term forum. So as long as there's one forum, I guess technically we're talking multiple threads within the forum. My concern is that we didn't have multiple forums.
Okay, see, click on group 4 there, Doc. This is where we've been posting our threads.
This is good too, because most of these people, oh, well, now look, if this is working for your group, that's cool. You've kind of got another level here. I think it's going to be a little more confusing this way, because here are some Unit 2 topics: language of worship, language of worship, language of worship. I think it would be easier for your group if you came out here and created a Unit 2 forum. Because my concern is this is going to get a little busy. Because here's all the incarnational worship stuff here. What I would suggest, Josh, I'm glad you asked this. I think it's going to be better for your group. Probably a little late for your group to do this week. So I would just continue under here. But I think what I would do on your group is I would create Unit 3 as a new forum, and let Unit 3 be a totally new forum. Because what's going to happen here, this is going to get really jumbled up, and people are going to get confused about what is week 1 and week 2. Does that make sense, Josh? I'm going to go ahead and do it for Josh's group. Unit 3, History of Worship. Post Unit 3 here.
Hey, can I ask a question?
All right, so now you see this? So this is where you're going to do Unit 3, Josh. Does that make sense? Are you seeing that? Josh, did I lose you?
Dr. Woodward?
Yeah, I'm talking to Josh right now. I'll come back to you. Josh, did I lose you? Uh-oh, lost my screen somehow. Oh, there it is. All right. Let me stop sharing. I lost Josh temporarily. Josh, you're muted for some reason, dude.
I'm back
Okay.
now. Something happened and I lost connection.
All right, does that make sense what I did?
Yes, sir. Go ahead and create a forum, and then we'll post within that forum.
Yeah, I think that's going to be better because thank you so much for asking that. I can see why that was a little confusing. But yeah, just have a forum for each topic. So here's the two from, we'll just say, I mean, I know you've got some Unit 2 stuff happening under Group 4. That's fine. But for next week, let's do Unit 3 right here. And then you'll have Unit 4. That's going to be a better model.
Okay.
Good question. That's super helpful for all of us. All right. Now, Mrs. Lee, Miss Lee?
Yes, Dr. Woodward, I have a quick question for you.
Yes.
You mentioned that group 4, they can create one topic above. I'm group in 3, but as a student, we cannot create thread.
Yes, you can. Under your group project, under group discussion, you can.
Okay, so if I go to the group discussion, group 3, there's a created thread. If I create a thread for the another
Let's
topic.
see what your group has done. Let me look at it.
Okay.
All right, let's see what they did. Whoa!
You see, so it's
Somebody has already done.
So we introduce each other, and then we post the incarnation of worship topic on there, and a language of worship topic in there.
Whoa!
So
looks like somebody's already jumped ahead. All right.
So mixed up.
Wait a second. Hold on. Let me just make sure I'm looking at the right thing. Oh wait, I was looking at the wrong semester.
Okay.
Okay, that would explain that. I was like, whoa. All right, are you guys seeing my screen?
No.
No, I'm seeing you.
Oh, I thought I'd hit share screen. Hold on, let me try it again. All right, now we're sharing the screen. Okay, here we go. Oh, all right, look here. Well, here's what's happened so far on yours. Everybody did it under one forum, okay, so far.
Okay.
And somebody's already done Unit 2. So really what needs to happen is the same as what I just told Josh. What I would prefer is that you create a new forum, okay? I'm going to go ahead and do this for Unit. Have you done Unit 2 yet, ma'am?
No, not yet, because
All right, look, I'm going to do it for you right now. I'm going to do it for you right now. Here we go. Unit 2. But what I want everybody to see is any of you can do this. You have the power as a student to do this if you're the first one that comes to it. Unit 2, language of worship. Post here. Okay. Now I'm posting it for Unit 3 because there was a little bit of confusion. But in future weeks, you're going to post it on your own.
Okay.
All right, so now you see it as a totally separate forum. And now you could click on that and you can create a thread. And people can read.
Okay, the problem is as a student, we cannot see, okay, you as a professor, you can create on this screen, you can create a thread for the topic Unit 2, but as a student, we cannot create that topic
Okay,
unit.
well, look here. Look here in
Okay.
Unit 1. You see, all of these people
Mhm.
have created these. These are all
Yeah,
students.
I did. Yeah, I did. But this thread, I think we can use already. This thread topic was created for Unit 1 for introduce ourselves.
Yeah,
For
one
Unit
of the
1.
students, one of the
Mhm.
students did it. One of the students did it.
I don't know how other student create.
Yeah. Yeah. Does anybody have their Blackboard open just to make sure I'm correct in what I'm saying?
Yes, there you are.
I just want somebody to verify that I am correct, that you could, who just said yes, they've got theirs open? Who said that?
Dr. Woolward, I had mine open. I had to walk away from my computer. I'm not sure that we can start a forum. I think we can edit the forums that are there. It didn't look like it gave me the option to start the forum.
Oh, okay. So what you're saying is, because if that is the case, all right.
Yeah, we
So what
can't
you're
create
saying
a
is,
forum, Doc.
okay,
Mine's open and it doesn't have an option to.
okay. So actually, Josh, I need to go back to what we said originally. Okay. Um, yeah. Now, I'm wondering how this person, because I have Rich Day here who has created it looks like he created a forum. So what do you guys see up here where I have create forum? You have create thread,
No.
No, mine just says forum.
but if you click on it, nothing happens.
Oh, all it does, it changes the order of the threads in that forum.
Okay. So you're all the only thing which group are you looking at? That would be helpful.
Should be group for my group, group 4.
Oh, okay. I'm talking to Josh again. Okay. Let me go back to that group.
And somebody's posted a Unit 3 History of Worship post Unit 3 here already.
All right, good.
It wasn't there before.
All right. So what you're saying is all you see on your screen are these 3 forums.
Yes, sir. And
Yeah.
that top left says forum with an arrow.
Yeah. What's confusing me is how this, I don't think I posted this, but
Yeah,
I guess
you
it's
didn't. It
possible.
wasn't there. It wasn't there
Yeah.
5 minutes ago. Somebody else just posted that somehow.
Yeah. So what you're saying is the only thing you have the ability to create is if I go into group 4, the only thing you can create is a thread here.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Then what
Now, I'm
we're
sure
going
someone
to do
can
is
click
back to
on my
what you were
thread.
thinking. Do I now?
I think someone can click on my thread. Let's
Right.
say I put that inside here. Someone can click on my thread and then create a thread inside.
Right, exactly. And you could create your own thread, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Inside.
So this is actually where we're going to do it right here. So let me back up on what I said a minute ago now that I see what you're seeing. So here's where you should have, instead of having 3 languages of worship, there should be just one. So that right now there's 1, 2. What everybody should have done is respond to you instead of having 4 different. And then prayer requests, that's great. Nothing wrong with that. But where you have language of worship, it really should, everybody should be working off that thread. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir. That's what we'll do moving forward.
All right, that's what you need to do moving forward. Now back to Miss Lee. Does that answer your question, Miss Lee?
Oh yes, thank you.
Yeah, that's what we need to do. Thank you for that clarification.
All right, thank you.
And it does appear, I'm going to check one other group. It does appear everybody has a generic group where they can do that. I've just checked too. I'm going to check one other just to make sure. Yeah. So yeah, this is, for example, this is group 2. So what they would do is they'd come right here under group 2, and this is where the threads would be created. So instead of having these multiple threads, we would have, like right now, they're in good shape. Oh, Mr. Atkins, I think I just talked to him. Jay
Yes,
Atkins.
yes.
So yeah, so that's perfect. You started it. And really what we would want is everybody in your group to respond to your thread. So he's already started one. He's got some good stuff there. And then everybody would reply to him. And that would be a single thread. That's how we want to do it. You did it right, Jay.
Hey, I have just one quick question.
Yeah.
For the content for mine, I'm not sure that I answered the right question. So it was a series of questions that I answered. I don't know if you could just briefly look at that. I just wanted to make sure that I was answering the questions that you guys were asking.
For Unit 2?
Yeah, for Unit 2, it said something about language, and obviously I watched the video, the 27-minute video, but I answered the questions from kind of the unit introduction at that top section.
I'm sure that's fine. This is really Dr. Miller's unit because he does the even ones. So,
Okay.
I'm sure that's fine. But and usually, yeah, I'm sure that's fine. But it's Dr. Miller's unit, so I would have to defer to him.
Sounds good. Thank you, sir.
All right, let me just clarify one last time, because we chased kind of a rabbit we didn't need to chase. Your discussion groups, you have the ability to create thread. Let me share the screen again. You have the ability to create threads within your groups. Where you do that, I'm going to go to a different group. So since we're showing all of them, might as well go through the whole gamut. Here's a group, discussion 5. I'm going to go to 5. I'm going to go to group discussion board. Oh, wow, this one looks like everything's in the right place. Okay. All right, so the only difference is where they've got multiple threads here, we would want just one thread for Unit 2. Let's see if these folks have already done this right. Yes, they have. So right now, Group 5 is on the right track. They created a single thread for language of worship, and everybody is responding to that single thread. That's exactly what I want you to do. So Group 5, wherever you may be, that's exactly right. All right, does anybody else have a question? Anybody else have a question? You just have to unmute yourself if you have a question. Stephen, do you have a question?
I do.
All right, what's your question?
The book review is due next weekend.
Okay.
Is that correct? One of my syllabus had.
Say that again. We would go by the syllabus on this. Let me hold on.
It changed, so I was just making sure.
What date changed?
I just want to make sure that I was.
Yeah, where did
one
you?
of my other classes, I had an assignment that was. It's September 10th
class,
on our syllabus for.
Not this class, though, right? Okay.
Yeah, I'm just double checking on a date.
Yeah. Let's see here. All right. The date I've got, I'm getting there. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/2022. 10/10/20 is September 10th.
Okay, I just want to double check.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody else have a question? Just unmute and ask if you have a question. I can't actually see everybody at once. All right, well, let me ask. I'm glad nobody has questions. That's good. Did you guys have any questions about the reading from last week, incarnational worship? Anybody had any questions about that? Okay, so the first chapter was more philosophic, obviously, on the topic of what is worship, and probably some things some of you have thought about before. The fact that worship really can happen at any moment. It could be while I'm walking around campus, it could be while I'm listening to worship music. But really, this class, I hope you noticed by the end of chapter 1, I was really trying to gear things toward corporate worship. And sometimes we always default back to what is worship on a philosophical level. You'll get no argument from me. Of course, worship can be as you're reading your systematic theology book. But called men and women of God play these roles where we're asked to lead people in corporate worship. And so that's really what this class is about. In fact, I make the argument that if you're really talking about personal worship, that's really more spiritual formation, okay? That's your personal devotion, worship time before the Lord. Now, if that's not in place, obviously you're not going to be a very good leader. But this class really assumes that that is in place. So we're not going to, even though there'll be some topics that kind of delve into that, really this class and questions you would be asking the final are more related to corporate worship. One reason I'm emphasizing this is I find every semester, particularly online, on a final exam question, I'll have people try to answer a final exam question as though I were asking them about personal worship. Like they'll say things like, well, a person can't even begin to worship until they've accepted Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. Well, I agree with that, of course, but they do not score high on that question because that's not what this class is about. This class is about corporate worship. So it's really important that you noted before I even got out of chapter 1, I had already switched gears to say when it comes to corporate worship, how do we tend to experience corporate worship? And I made an argument that we use art mediums to experience corporate worship. I include preaching in that, by the way. So if you're a pastor and you're saying, well, preaching is more important than art, well, I'm not disagreeing on that, but say PhD level preaching here at NOBTS, we teach an art of preaching. Those guys go back and study techniques by Aristotle and rhetoric techniques. And so they're looking toward, of course, first and foremost, biblical exegesis, but they're looking toward a technique of preaching, which is an art form. So that's what I mean when I say our worship experience is driven by artistic medium. And it just so happens that music is one of those that goes back thousands of years, all the way back to the Old Testament era. So that's why you got a music professor and a preaching professor who are doing this class together. It's the practitioner side of what we do as leaders. Then chapter 2, what I'm getting at is really the core of this idea of incarnational worship. Even though the idea is rooted in the incarnation of Christ, what we're saying with incarnational worship is that we have, of course, a desire to have pure, holy worship. We also have a desire to be relevant, to connect with the culture, no matter where God has placed us. We often have the error historically of going too far one way or the other. We're trying so hard to be culturally relevant that we compromise the purity of worship. We're trying so hard to have purity in worship, we end up, as T.W. Hunt says, we become puritanical. The other word I've suggested is disembodied. I think that happened in the Middle Ages, that it becomes disembodied. So we want to avoid either extreme, and what I suggest to you at the end of chapter 2 is that there are 5 tools to avoid that. Number 1, biblical. Dr. Miller is going to be covering biblical theological foundations of worship. Next week is historical. I consider that priority 3, before aesthetics, before cultural considerations, because we need to know historically what has worked or not worked. What can we learn from history? What's the scope of worship in history? Then number 4, for me, is cultural considerations. And then number 5 is aesthetics, the pursuit of what is beautiful. Then it's not enough just to have those foundations. I've got to be prayerful. I've got to be humble. We don't want knowledge to puff up. Prayerfully seek wisdom to know, in my setting, how can we as a leadership team create incarnational worship in our setting so it's vibrant, it's spirit-filled, it's seeking after purity in Christ, but it's also culturally relevant. So that's really a summation of what I'm saying in chapter 1 and 2. Just want to make sure everybody's clear on that. Anybody have a question about that? Chapter 1 and 2 are connected to Unit 1. Does anybody have a question about that? Great. All right. Unit 3 next week, just a little bit of foreshadowing. I did audio files, Stephen, because, if you're like me, I like to sometimes listen to things and be efficient, listen while I'm jogging. So I created audio files so you could download those. Some weeks there are visuals. Next week, I just decided to go with audio files, okay? Now, please hear me carefully on this. If you want to take copious notes, that's great. I'd love for you to do that. But really, the only things you're going to be responsible for on history, at the very end of the final exam, there's going to be a few history multiple choice questions. I do cover them in the lectures, but I'm going to give you an outline that contains everything that you would need for those multiple choice questions. So you literally, if you knew that outline well, you could do well on those multiple choice questions. So don't feel like you got to take copious notes for that purpose. The other reason that I want you to think about history is on the aesthetic design. I mentioned this last week. I'm now saying it twice. On the aesthetic design rubric, you're told on one of the categories that you need to have some historical references. So you could use one of the historical references that I make for the material next week. So that's a possibility for you. And that's really the 2 main reasons that we would want you to listen to history. But, practically speaking, those are the main reasons. Philosophically, I want you to be interested in worship history because it's going to give you a better picture of how worship has developed over time, and it will make you a better worship leader. So I'm convinced that the 5 tools of worship leadership are, number 1, biblical foundations. That's who we are as Baptists. If we're anything, we should be people of the book. Number 2, theological frameworks, and to be able to see how that connects. Now, sometimes I think our theology gets a little ahead of our biblical knowledge, okay? I love theology. I love those debates and all that, but really our knowledge of the Bible should lead the way. Then theological. Then history helps us sort of organize all of that. How has the church interpreted these things? How has the church done worship over time? And then number 4 is cultural considerations, and 5 is aesthetics. So those are our 5 considerations. I see Chris Lee has just joined us. Chris, good to see you. I've got you on mute. Hold on a second. You may be trying to tell us something. What you got, Chris?
Yeah, I was just saying I'm driving right now, but I thought I'd check in and listen.
All right, brother. This might be our first driving participant. Be careful.
Yeah.
All right. Do you have any questions, Chris?
I just wanted to clarify that we can follow up on week 1 discussion board material after week 1.
Yeah, in
Okay.
fact, I know you guys are busy, so you'll notice. Let me show everybody something. I think this is something you'll like about the way we designed the class. You'll notice under discussion that it says that you are to participate over at least 10 different weeks. So what that does
Right.
is by saying at least 10 different weeks, it means you have actually a little leeway some weeks if you're in South Louisiana, something like a flood hits you, that you can spread those 10 weeks. What we don't want, Chris, is to wait to the very end.
Right.
And then jump in then. Now, Chris, since you just joined us, let me clarify something else. We had a little bit of confusion about where to do the posting, okay? So let me just let you know, since you just joined, under each unit, and Group 5 has done this picture perfect so far. So I'm going to go back to Group 5 to show everybody this because they're a great model right now. On Group 5, all of their threads, all of them from week 1 and 2 are under a single forum.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm clicking on that. It's under a single forum. If I click on group discussion board, and that it's called WLFA16 discussion group 5. And the cool thing about that is now students can create threads. Not only that, but they are off to a great start on unit 2, because what we want is only one thread for each unit. So the first person in there, his name was Hayden Slack. He created a thread and somebody's already responded to it. So group 5 is doing exactly what we want you to do. One person creates the thread, then Zach Spann came back and responded to that thread. So it's okay that unit 1, we had a bunch of threads, no big deal. We're all figuring this out. But from now on out, we want to create just one thread for each unit.
Gotcha.
Just wanted to catch you up on that, Chris. Chris,
Yeah,
do you have
thank
any other
you.
questions? You're welcome. Do you have any other questions?
I'm good. I'm good right now. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to mute Chris. All right, guys, that was just a little preview of history. I love history of worship topics. We're probably not going to have a meeting next week, but let me tell you one thing from the lecture, just to kind of pull it out from next week, since I've got 9 participating, I want all of you to hear this. One of the things that I found since I've arrived at OBTS, I discovered this the first year or two. One of our massive reviews of worship history, it's a great one, is the Oxford History of Worship. It's a wonderful compilation of history of worship. And these folks are liturgists. You know, this is Church of England who compiles this, even though they review other historically important things in worship. And I noticed that on the section related to early Middle Age worship developments, we all know, and if you didn't know this, let me just say to the class very quickly, you know, we know a little bit about first century worship from looking at the New Testament, right? I mean, Paul tells us some things, all right? And then we have a few historical documents that tell us a little more, where you have a Pliny, for example, is documenting some historical things related to the Lord's Supper in correspondence with historical data with Caesar. We have some early Jewish Christians who've left us some writings in the Didache, okay? But the Didache is not necessarily representative of everything going on in Christianity, because we know Paul went as far as Rome, at least. So we really don't know how worship across Europe in the first century. Then all of a sudden, when Constantine made Christianity legal, now we start to get documentation after that in the early Middle Ages of what liturgy looked like. So it creates a little bit of a problem. Guess what the liturgists would like to say? The liturgists would like to say that the earliest known liturgies from the Catholic Church, which was like the church, right? I mean, we all would have been part of that at that time, because Eastern and Western had not even split in 4th century. But guess what? The liturgist, Josh, would like to say there's a clear connection between the Roman liturgy and 1st century, okay? And I would say that that's true to some extent, but there's a very interesting statement in the Oxford History of Worship that says we had always taken a particular researcher's word for this. His name was Gregory Dix. He had always made this statement, and he really had no data to back it up. Okay, it was just like, accepted. You're supposed to believe this. Later in the 20th century, a researcher by the name of Wainwright has come back and said, actually, there seems to be indications that there were different ways of doing the Lord's Supper, for example, and that maybe there were different cultural manifestations. So what I would suggest to you now, am I biased in this as a Baptist? Yes, because as a Baptist, I'm free form, right? So I'm wanting the research to say that there's freedom, okay? And we would say anyway, the Bible's our authority, not history. But if the liturgists were saying there's a clear link between 4th century and 1st century, then we might pay a little more attention to that. I mean, we want to pay attention to it anyway. But not only that, but guys, I don't know if you know who Robert Weber is, but Robert Weber has created a whole renaissance of interest in the ancient liturgy for evangelicals. Most states where you live, most states, your state worship leader was trained under the Weber Institute or directly by Robert Weber. Not all southern states, but many of them. So whether you realize it or not, the Weber influence is very strong. I love Weber. I love his influence. But I would give caution to say sometimes Weber puts so much emphasis on the liturgy, in the ancient liturgy, he almost makes it sound like it's authoritative. And I am saying, based on historical research, there might be as much evidence to say there's a little more freedom even historically. Okay, we're free anyway as Baptists. Your church, before God, you as the pastor and leader in your leadership there. But I'm saying even the history would seem to point to that. Now, you're going to see me say later in the semester, I do think having some logical sequence, which the liturgy suggests. For example, what I like to suggest to students, not necessarily fourfold worship, because we're not doing the supper every week in most Baptist churches, but moving from transcendence to immanence. So where I'm going to go from that freedom is to say, what if we at least think about trying to move from transcendence to immanence in our worship? And by the way, on your rubrics for the designs, I suggest that maybe you think about a logical progression. And that's what I mean by that. Move from the big picture of who God is in your early worship songs like How Great Is Our God at the beginning of the service, that talk about Creator God, Holy God, the big picture of who he is, and then move into immanence, which is the gospel. I mean, we only have immanence because of the gospel. So really, we should purposely be bringing people to the gospel in the music every week. Start with transcendence, move to the gospel, and then if you want that last song to be thematic, pastors, have that last song be thematic. Don't ask your worship guy to make every song, for goodness sake, about the tithe if you're preaching on the tithe. It doesn't make any sense. Have them give a big, beautiful transcendence to immanence picture. And I'll be honest with you, if you do it like that and make that last song thematic, and we call that theme enhanced. Dr. Sharp, who helped write one of your texts, gave me that term, theme enhanced. That's really what we're talking about. It's a theme enhanced service. Most pastors, it's going to feel thematic to them because we've built a story now. We've gone from the big picture of who God is. We've moved into the gospel. And now my last song will focus on the theme for today's service. Any questions about any of that, guys? I try to throw you a little lanyap if you show up for these meetings, okay? So you'll notice I'm kind of throwing in some things that are on the rubrics. And Stephen is smiling for good reason, because exactly, I'm trying to point out some things to you. Lots of people miss that need for historical references on the aesthetic design. And I don't say the words transcendence to immanence on the aesthetic design and kinesthetic design, but I'm telling you right now, that's what I mean by that. When I say logical progression, I want to see you move from the big picture of who God is into the gospel. All right, guys, if there's no other questions, we're going to end today's recording. And we'll see you probably in 2 weeks because I'm in Orlando next week. Next week is my week, but hopefully our discussions groups are going well enough now, that'll take care of itself. If anybody wants to hang around for a question that's maybe not for the whole group, that's fine. I'm going to hit stop record and I'll hang around for just a second.